Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The Greenwood estate stood regal under the amber wash of the setting sun, yet every room echoed with an unbearable silence. Lewis Greenwood, tall and broad-shouldered, walked through the vast hallway with slow, deliberate steps. His feet, clad in leather slippers, made no sound on the marbled floors. In his hand was a glass of untouched wine. He wasn't drinking it, he just needed to hold something. He paused at the nursery door, still painted pale yellow, the same color his late wife had insisted on when they were preparing for their twins. Slowly, he pushed it open. The room had remained untouched for nearly 6 years. Toys neatly arranged on the shelf, a pair of twin cribs, and above them, cloud stickers peeling slightly from the wall. The stillness felt like grief itself. He walked in and reached for the drawer under one of the cribs. His hand trembled as he pulled out a tiny, folded piece of fabric. A single white baby sock, still soft, still smelling faintly of lavender. That was the last thing he had touched before they took his wife away. She had died giving birth, and the twins were stillborn. Since then, Lewis had built a billion-dollar empire in tech, yet none of it filled the crater left inside him. Kneeling on the nursery floor now, sock clutched in his fist, he broke down, his sobs silent but violent. "I did everything right," he whispered. "Why didn't I get to keep them?" Edna, the housekeeper who had served him loyally for over a decade, passed by the hallway and paused outside. She heard his grief but gave him privacy. She'd seen this cycle too many times. But something in her spirit whispered, this cycle might finally be nearing its end. A heavy downpour soaked the streets of Lagos, turning corners into rivers and alleys into mud pits. Tracy Marshall clutched the frayed edges of her oversized hoodie, wrapping it tighter around her twins, Wendy and Eugene, as they huddled beneath a leaking bus shelter. The twins' eyes, wide and alert, darted between the puddles and occasional passing cars, hoping one would stop, though they knew better by now. Tracy glanced down at her trembling hands. She was holding her last valuable possession, a gold-plated necklace from her late mother. The pawn shop across the street blinked its dull neon light. She hesitated, then crossed in the rain, barefoot and desperate, her soaked wrapper dragging through the water like a defeated flag. Inside, she handed over the necklace wordlessly. The man behind the counter looked her over, counted 4 worn notes, and slid them across. No words, no pity. Back under the bus, she handed Eugene half a loaf of bread and tore the remaining piece in 2 for herself and Wendy. "Eat slowly," she whispered, brushing damp curls from Wendy's forehead. "Tomorrow, we'll find something better." The little girl nodded but didn't meet her eyes. Their clothes clung to their skin, and their thin blanket was too wet to offer comfort. Eugene lay down across the rusty metal seat, curling into himself like he used to do when he was scared. Tracy looked up at the sky, her lips trembling in silent prayer. "God, even if you don't hear me, hear them." The street was quiet except for thunder, the occasional screech of tires, and the soft, shivering breaths of 2 children, too young to know how much they'd already endured. Rain lashed the windows of the Greenwood estate with violent rhythm. Inside, the warm glow of the chandelier in the foyer contrasted starkly with the darkness outside. Lewis stood by the fireplace in his study, sipping lukewarm coffee, lost in thought when a knock, faint but persistent, echoed through the hall. He paused, confused. No one came here uninvited, especially not at this hour. The knock came again, this time a little stronger. Edna rushed from the kitchen, her apron still on. "I'll get it," she said, but Lewis waved her off, curious. He opened the massive oak door slowly, and there they were, 2 small children, soaked to the bone, huddled under a threadbare shawl. Behind them stood Tracy, her face pale, her lips trembling. She didn't say hello or please. She simply said, "I have nowhere else to go." For a moment, Lewis just stared. Wendy coughed, and Eugene wiped his nose with his sleeve. Edna gasped softly behind him. "Sir, we can't leave them out there." Lewis stepped back instinctively, his mind spinning. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Tracy lowered her head. "Just one night. I don't want money. Just somewhere warm for them to sleep." Her voice cracked under the weight of her pride. Louis glanced down at the twins, then back at her. Something inside him stirred, something he thought had died years ago. "Follow me," he muttered, then turned without waiting for a reply. Edna rushed to get towels and a hot pot of tea. As the front door closed, the storm outside only grew wilder, but inside, a new storm had just been ushered in, one that would shake the silence of this mansion forever. Edna led Tracy and the twins into the lounge, where a fire had been set earlier that evening. The flames flickered gently as Wendy and Eugene sank into the softness of the carpet, stretching their small hands toward the warmth. Tracy sat quietly in the corner, soaked and shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though still shielding her children from the world. "I'll bring blankets," Edna said gently. She returned moments later with fluffy towels, warm clothes from her son's old drawer, and steaming cups of cocoa. The twins sipped slowly, their eyes darting around the grand room as though they were inside a fairy tale. Louis stood by the archway, arms folded, silently observing them, his face unreadable. "They can sleep here by the fire," he said at last. "But just for tonight." Tracy looked up, her eyes glassy. "Thank you. I promise tomorrow we'll go." Louis nodded, but said nothing. As the clock chimed 10, the children had already curled up on the large rug near the hearth. Eugene mumbled something in his sleep, and Wendy clutched the towel like it was a soft toy. Tracy covered them both, then stepped back, unsure if she should sit or stand. "There's a guest room upstairs," Edna offered softly. "You'll catch a cold out here." Tracy hesitated, glancing at Louis, who turned away without a word. "All right," she whispered. Edna led her upstairs. As Louis walked past the children, he paused. Wendy stirred and reached for his ankle in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like, "Daddy." Louis froze, heart slamming in his chest. He slowly eased her hand away and walked off, but sleep would not find him that night. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the heavy curtains of the guest room. Tracy blinked awake, unsure for a moment where she was until her eyes landed on the plush duvet and the faint scent of lavender. Her heart raced with panic, then calmed as memory returned. She sat up quickly and checked the hallway, then tiptoed downstairs. The sight that greeted her brought a lump to her throat. Wendy and Eugene were still asleep, curled into each other on the rug, their cheeks flushed with warmth. In the adjoining kitchen, Edna was already at work, her hands busy over a simmering pot of ogi and milk. Tracy hesitated at the doorway, uncertain. "Good morning," Edna offered warmly, barely looking up. "Sit. They'll wake up to something hot in their bellies today." Tracy stepped inside slowly, voice barely audible. "Please let me help. I can mop, clean, organize. Anything." Louis, seated in the breakfast nook scrolling through his tablet, glanced up when he heard her. "This isn't a boarding house," he said coldly. "You don't need to repay one night of kindness with desperation." Tracy looked down, but her tone remained steady. "It's not desperation, it's dignity." That made Louis pause for a beat. Edna raised a brow, hiding her smile behind the ladle. "Well," she said carefully, "perhaps she could tidy the library. It's been gathering dust since before Christmas." Louis said nothing, but his silence wasn't resistance. Tracy nodded. "Thank you," she murmured. She hadn't been thanked for anything in a long time. Later, as she began dusting the bookshelves, her fingers trembled over a photo of a woman, smiling, glowing, and heavily pregnant. It sat behind glass, framed and untouched. "Who is she?" Wendy had wandered in, her voice soft. Tracy quickly pulled her back toward the lounge. "Someone special," she whispered, though she already suspected the answer. In his study, Louis sat with an untouched cup of tea, his gaze fixed on the rain now reduced to mist beyond the window. It had been years since he'd allowed anyone, especially a child, into his personal space. Yet when he passed the lounge earlier and saw Eugene humming softly while building something from firewood bits, something inside him had shifted. The tune was hauntingly familiar. It was the lullaby his wife used to sing every night before bed, the same one she had once whispered to her swollen belly while they lay in bed dreaming of the future. "Where did you hear that song?" Louis had asked quietly, startling the boy. Eugene blinked up, unsure. "My mummy sings it sometimes, when we can't sleep." Louis said nothing more. He returned to his study, heart pounding. He hadn't heard that melody since the day of the funeral. Meanwhile, upstairs, Tracy folded laundry Edna had washed for the children. Her fingers brushed over Lewis's initials monogrammed on a small towel, and for a moment she wondered what kind of man allowed strangers into his house, yet remained so guarded. Downstairs, Edna noticed his brooding and sat beside him. That tune the boy was humming. It meant something, didn't it? Lewis stared into his cup. "I thought I buried it with her," he said flatly. "But it found its way back." Edna placed a hand on his. "Maybe you didn't bury it. Maybe you were waiting for someone to sing it back to you." Lewis didn't reply, but that night he stood at the study door longer than usual, watching Eugene and Wendy draw in silence. When Eugene looked up and gave a small wave, Lewis nodded stiffly. It wasn't affection, but it was the first acknowledgement. And it meant everything. The morning air was filled with the smell of yam and eggs, and the twins were already seated at the long dining table, legs swinging beneath the chairs too tall for them. Tracy stood to the side, not daring to sit until Edna insisted. Lewis walked in, dressed sharply in navy slacks and a cashmere sweater carrying the subtle scent of cologne and coffee. Wendy looked up, eyes bright. "Do you have toys?" she asked, her voice light. Lewis blinked, taken aback. "No," he replied stiffly. "I'm not used to having guests like you." Wendy didn't frown. Instead, she opened her little notebook and flipped to a page where she had drawn a picture of a girl and a dog beside a castle. "You can borrow mine," she said with a smile. Something about her innocence forced Lewis to look away quickly, pretending to read his phone. As they ate, Eugene glanced at a thick novel by Lewis's elbow. "Is that about a boy lost in the forest?" he asked. Lewis, surprised again, nodded. "You know the story," Eugene shrugged. "Mum used to read parts to us, but we never finished it." Lewis hesitated, then slid the book closer. "It's yours now." Tracy looked up sharply, but before she could speak, Lewis added, "Just until you finish it." It wasn't generosity, it was his way of retreating. Later that day, Tracy found Wendy on the patio reading aloud to Eugene. Lewis stood nearby, pretending to read the newspaper, but his eyes softened every time Wendy stumbled over a word and Eugene corrected her with a giggle. Edna watched it all unfold from the kitchen window and whispered, "Boundaries are being tested, Mr. Greenwood, whether you like it or not." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a mellow glow over the Greenwood estate. After dinner, Tracy had asked the twins to thank Mr. Greenwood properly. Wendy disappeared briefly and returned clutching an old, duct-taped shoebox. "We made these," she said, her tiny fingers pushing the box across the floor to where Lewis sat beside the fireplace. He looked at her, then at the box. Inside were folded sheets of brown paper, charcoal sketches, stick figures, and shapes drawn in bright crayon. There were clumsy attempts at lions, houses, and once a spaceship. But one drawing made him pause. It showed a tall man holding the hands of two smaller children. The man's eyes were shaded with blue crayon and tears. "That's you," Eugene said shyly. "From the first night, you looked sad." Lewis swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He held the drawing longer than necessary. Tracy watched him from across the room, her arms folded but her eyes soft. "They draw when they don't have words," she explained. "It helps them process things." Edna, seated beside them, cleared her throat gently. "Maybe they see something in you that you don't see in yourself yet." Lewis didn't respond, but he tucked the sketch under his book before leaving the room. Later that night, he placed it gently on his bedside table, next to the only remaining photo of his wife. He stood there for a long time, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "What are you doing to me, kids?" he murmured, almost to himself. The house was still, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel lonely, it felt occupied, lived in, changed. Edna poured herself a cup of tea and settled into the armchair opposite Lewis in the study, watching him through narrowed eyes. The children had gone to bed early, and Tracy was folding laundry in the guest wing. "You haven't been this restless in years," she said softly. Lewis looked up from his tablet. "I'm fine, Edna." She sipped quietly before setting the cup down. "You stare at them like they're ghosts, but they're not. They're real, and they need you more than you realize." Lewis's expression hardened. "They're not my responsibility." Edna tilted her head. "Neither was I at first. But you didn't let me go when I lost everything, remember?" Louis said nothing, but his fingers tightened around the tablet. The memories were crawling back faster than he could shut them down. Maybe, Edna continued gently, they didn't knock on your door by accident. Maybe that was God's idea of knocking on your heart again. Louis scoffed, but the look in his eyes wasn't mockery, it was fear. I'm not a savior, Edna, he whispered. I failed the only family I ever had. Edna leaned forward, her voice firmer. You didn't fail. Life just didn't play fair. But you're still here, Louis. And now you've been given a second chance. Louis stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. The light from the hallway cast faint shadows of the children's drawings on the study wall. They'll leave, he muttered. Everyone does. Edna stood, placed a gentle hand on his arm, and whispered, Then why are you so afraid of letting them stay? He didn't answer. But that night, he checked the locks twice and stood outside the twins' door longer than usual. Louis was seated on the veranda, sipping from a mug of herbal tea as the twins giggled in the distance, chasing each other between the flower beds. Their laughter floated through the air like music, unsettling and beautiful. He tried not to watch them, but he couldn't help it. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Victor Dale. Louis answered reluctantly. You've been ghosting me, Louis. Victor's voice crackled through the line. We're behind on the merger with Trident Systems. You can't hide out in that mansion forever. Louis rubbed his forehead. I'm not hiding. I'm reevaluating things. Victor's laugh was harsh. Since when does Louis Greenwood reevaluate? You either build, sell, or walk away. You don't babysit. Louis's tone turned cold. Careful, Victor. You're assuming too much. Victor sighed. Look, man. We've both had our tragedies, but business doesn't wait. If you're not moving forward, you're stalling, and stalling costs. Louis glanced again at the twins, now sitting under a tree, their heads bowed over a shared storybook. Maybe moving forward looks different now, he said softly. Maybe I'm tired of running from the ghosts. Victor was silent for a beat. Are you seriously thinking of not selling? After everything? Louis ended the call without answering. That evening, as Tracy folded fresh laundry by the window, she caught Louis watching the children again, this time with something unspoken in his eyes. A question. A pull. Something shifting, even if he wouldn't admit it yet. She walked past him quietly and said, Sometimes all it takes is for someone to choose to stay. Louis didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. The sun glared overhead as Louis parked his black SUV outside the community library. Wendy squealed softly from the back seat, her nose pressed against the window. Is this where all the stories live? She whispered. Eugene clutched his notebook tightly, nerves and excitement tangled in his little chest. Tracy had hesitated when Louis suggested the trip, unsure if it was a genuine offer or a fleeting whim. But now, watching the twins race ahead toward the entrance, she stood stunned. Louis handed her a tote bag. They'll need somewhere to keep the books, he said simply. Inside, the librarian, a bespectacled woman with a kind smile, welcomed them, eyeing the children's torn sandals and mismatched shirts with brief curiosity. New visitors, she asked. Louis nodded. First time. They'd like to register. As Eugene wrote his name carefully on the library form, the librarian smiled. Such neat handwriting for a 6-year-old. Louis stood back, arms crossed, trying to appear disinterested, but the corners of his lips twitched upward when Wendy asked if she could borrow 10 books. One at a time, the librarian chuckled. After a short tour, the twins nestled into a reading nook, already immersed in brightly colored pages. Tracy leaned against the doorway, arms folded, gratitude softening her expression. You didn't have to bring them, she said. Louis shrugged. They were starting to read the cereal box. Figured I'd give them something better. Tracy chuckled quietly, and for a flicker of a moment, they smiled at each other without caution. On the ride home, Eugene dozed off with a book open on his lap, and Wendy held her new library card like it was a golden ticket. Louis drove silently, but there was peace in the quiet. Something warm, something whole. Later that evening, as Edna prepared dinner, Tracy stood by the counter, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. I've been thinking, she said. Edna looked up from the pot. Tracy took a deep breath. You've all done more than enough already. I don't want to keep accepting and not giving anything back. Let me work. I'm not asking for money, just a chance to earn my keep. I can clean, cook, organize files, whatever you need." Lewis walked in at that moment, catching the tail end of her words. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he leaned against the wall, watching her closely. "You think I let you stay because I need a maid?" he asked. Tracy met his gaze. "No, I think you let us stay because you're kind. But kindness isn't a debt I want hanging over me." The room fell silent for a beat. Edna stirred her pot, glancing between them. Lewis exhaled. "You want to work?" "Fine. The library is a mess. The attic's worse. I haven't seen the basement office in months." Tracy nodded immediately. "Done." The next day, she tied a scarf over her head and got to work. By noon, she'd alphabetized 2 shelves in the study, scrubbed out the dust from the reading chairs, and begun sorting through old ledgers that Edna had boxed away long ago. As she worked, she hummed quietly, a habit she'd picked up when life got heavy. Upstairs, Lewis heard it. The melody was unfamiliar, but something in the rhythm soothed him. At lunch, he found her wiping her forehead with the hem of her shirt. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing playfully to the dust on her nose. Tracy blinked, then laughed, a real laugh, and for the first time he smiled back, unforced, unguarded. Tracy jerked awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as her dream dissolved into the shadows around her. The echo of Clint's voice still rang in her ears, angry, accusing, twisted with threats. She sat up slowly and tiptoed down the hall, pausing just long enough to peek in on the twins. They were sound asleep, limbs tangled in blankets, peace etched into their small faces. She exhaled deeply, wiping her damp brow. Downstairs, she retrieved a glass of water from the kitchen. She didn't know Lewis was still awake in the living room, scrolling absently through a tablet. He glanced up. "Nightmare?" he asked. She flinched, not expecting him. "Something like that," she murmured. He didn't press. Instead, he stood and walked over to her, offering a second glass. "This one's cold." She reached for it, and as she did, the sleeve of her shirt slipped back, revealing the bruises etched like faded ink along her arm and collarbone. Lewis saw them. His expression darkened. He didn't say anything, but the silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded. Tracy caught his eyes and quickly adjusted her sleeve. "Old wounds," she whispered. "Some take longer to heal than others." He looked at her, not with pity, but with something closer to quiet rage. "Who did that to you?" he asked, voice low. "It doesn't matter anymore," she replied, swallowing hard. "What matters is I got my kids out before he turned on them too." Lewis nodded once, the fire in his chest unmistakable. "If he ever shows his face here, you tell me," he said flatly. Tracy didn't respond, but she sat down across from him that night, and they finished their water in silence, no longer strangers, no longer just guests and host, but 2 wounded people beginning to understand one another. It was a quiet afternoon when Wendy realized her small purple diary was missing. Panic seized her tiny chest as she searched every corner of the lounge and patio. "Mummy, have you seen it?" she asked, eyes wide. Tracy knelt beside her, brushing curls from her daughter's face. "Where did you last keep it, sweetheart?" Wendy sniffled. "Under the pillow. But maybe it fell." The search led Edna to the laundry basket, where she found the damp notebook tucked beside folded towels. She turned it over in her hands, intending to dry it and return it until one page opened on its own. Her eyes skimmed lines scribbled in a child's careful hand. "Last night we heard shouting again. Mummy didn't cry this time. Eugene gave her the teddy we found. I think she misses smiling." Edna's heart ached. She closed the diary gently, but didn't return it right away. That evening, after the twins had fallen asleep and Tracy was in the kitchen rinsing plates, Edna approached her with the diary in hand. "I didn't mean to pry," she said softly, "but your little girl has a brave heart." Tracy froze, her eyes immediately locking on the book. "You read it?" she asked, her voice tight. Edna nodded solemnly. "Just enough to understand how much they've seen and how well you've shielded them." Tracy leaned against the wall, shoulders trembling. "I tried to make it seem like an adventure. Like sleeping outside was part of a story." Her voice cracked. "But I knew they knew better." Edna reached out and took her hand. "They didn't just survive those nights, Tracy. You gave them light in the darkest places. That's something only a real mother can do." For a long while, neither woman spoke. And when Tracy finally took the diary back, she pressed it to her chest like it was her child's heartbeat. Lewis stood in the hallway outside the guest room, about to knock, when he overheard Tracy's voice. It was soft but firm, spoken in the quiet authority of a mother setting sacred boundaries. "If anyone ever asks you to leave my side without telling me, what do you say?" Tracy asked. "No," Wendy and Eugene chorused. "And if someone offers you anything too good to be true?" "We run and find you," came Eugene's response. "Good," Tracy said. "Always trust your gut. But never trust someone who says, 'Don't tell your mum.'" Lewis stepped back before they noticed him, retreating to his study, thoughts spinning. He'd assumed Tracy was just cautious, but this was something else. She was preparing them to survive, not just live. Later, during lunch, he caught Eugene staring at a man through the gate from the kitchen window. "What's wrong?" Lewis asked. Eugene quickly looked down. "Nothing. I was just checking." After the twins went to nap, Lewis sat across from Tracy at the patio table. "You teach them to be afraid of people," he said bluntly. Tracy didn't flinch. "No, I teach them to be prepared. There's a difference." She wiped her hands with a cloth napkin. "You've lived behind walls, gates, and guards, Lewis. I've lived where evil walks right up and asks your name." Lewis leaned forward. "And are you still running from that evil?" Tracy met his gaze. "I'm not running. I'm hiding in plain sight until I can stop looking over my shoulder." Lewis studied her in silence. Then quietly he said, "What if one day you didn't have to?" She laughed, not bitterly, but with disbelief. "Then maybe my kids could just be kids again." She stood ready to walk away, but paused. "You don't have to protect us, Lewis. Just don't stand in our way." His reply was quiet. "What if I want to stand with you?" The dining room glowed under amber chandeliers as the table was set for a formal meal. Victor and Miriam Dale arrived sharply dressed, smiles tight, eyes scanning the unfamiliar signs of life in the mansion. "It's been a while," Victor said, clasping Lewis's hand. "We thought you'd gone full monk." Miriam leaned in to kiss Lewis's cheek, her perfume trailing behind her like smoke. "And who do we have living here now?" she asked, eyes darting toward the hallway. "Friends," Lewis replied coolly. "They're temporary guests." As dinner was served, Miriam twirled her fork through the jollof rice and asked, "So, are we celebrating your return to sanity, or are we still pretending to play house with strangers?" Lewis stiffened. "We're having dinner. That's all." Just then, Wendy wandered in barefoot, holding a book. She froze, startled by the strange faces. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I thought the room was empty." Miriam raised a brow, but before anyone could dismiss the child, Wendy looked at the guests and, without a hint of shyness, recited, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Silence fell. Victor blinked, impressed. Miriam forced a smile. Charming. Lewis smiled genuinely for the first time that night. "Wendy, this is Mr. Dale and Ms. Dale. Friends of mine. You can finish your line if you like." Wendy beamed. "They have their exits and their entrances." Then she curtsied, an awkward, sweet gesture, and skipped out. As she left, Lewis turned to his guests. "You were saying?" Miriam leaned back in her chair, her smile thin. "You've changed," Victor chuckled. "Or maybe he's finally waking up." But Lewis didn't hear them. His mind was on the girl quoting Shakespeare in bare feet, and how his house hadn't felt this alive in years. The next morning, Victor followed Lewis into his home office, still reeling from the unexpected dinner the night before. "So this is what you've been doing with your time, hosting stray children and quoting Shakespeare over stew." Lewis didn't respond. He stood by the window, watching the twins playing in the garden, their laughter faint but clear through the glass. Victor continued, his tone sharper. "You're a CEO, Lewis. You built an empire. Now you're throwing it away for a woman you don't know and kids that aren't yours." Lewis turned, voice firm. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm living. Maybe for the first time in years." Victor scoffed. "You think this makes you a better man? You're not their father. And this woman? She has secrets. You're getting too involved." "I know what I'm doing," Lewis said quietly, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Victor stepped closer. "You've been vulnerable ever since Helen died. That pain, you think this family can fix it? They'll leave. They always do." Lewis's jaw tightened. "That's enough. Victor shook his head. I'm your friend, Louis. I'm trying to protect you from regret. Louis stared him down. No, you're trying to protect the version of me that kept you rich and detached. But I'm not that man anymore. As Victor stormed out, Edna entered with a tray of tea. He doesn't get it, she murmured. Louis sighed. He doesn't have to. That evening, as he watched Wendy braid dandelions into Eugene's hair, Louis made a quiet decision he wasn't backing away this time. Not from them. Unable to shake Victor's warnings, Louis sat in his study late into the night, fingers poised over his laptop. Curiosity morphed into concern as he initiated a private background check, one only his position could authorize. With a few keystrokes, Tracy's full name revealed fragments of a buried past, marriage records, a missing persons report from 2 years ago, and a sealed police file involving domestic abuse and child endangerment. Then one name froze him, Clint Marshall. Louis leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery suffocating. He stared at the family photo they had taken at the library, Wendy grinning, Eugene mid-laugh, Tracy holding their hands. The image now shimmered with a new layer of fragility. He needed answers, not to accuse, but to understand. The next morning, Louis found Tracy in the back garden, sweeping fallen leaves. She noticed his tightened posture instantly. Something's wrong, she said, setting the broom down. Tell me. He didn't beat around it. I ran a search. On you. On your ex I had to know. Tracy's breath caught. Her shoulders stiffened. And now you do. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darkened. I was married to Clint Marshall. He was charming, until he wasn't. Then came the bruises. Then the threats. He said he'd sell the kids if I left. So I did what I had to do. We ran. Louis stepped closer. You should have told me. Tracy shook her head. Would you have let us in if I had? He didn't answer. The silence between them pulsed, thick with understanding and disappointment. I'm not asking for your pity, Louis, she said, voice steady. Just the truth. Do you still want us here? Louis looked at her, deeply. Now more than ever. That evening the estate sat under a bruised sky, the air thick with tension. Tracy stood on the veranda, arms wrapped around herself, watching the clouds gather. Louis approached slowly, the weight of their earlier conversation still pressing on his chest. I didn't mean to violate your privacy, he said. But I couldn't protect you without knowing what we were up against. Tracy turned to face him. I've lived my life being watched, judged, and second-guessed. You were different. At least, I thought you were. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with years of bottled fury. Do you know what it feels like to run with 2 toddlers, changing buses every few days, teaching them how to lie low just to survive? Her words pierced the silence. Louis stepped forward, his voice rough with regret. You're right. I've never known that kind of fear. But I do know loss, and I know what it means to want to rewrite a life. Tracy blinked, startled by the vulnerability in his tone. Then why not just ask me? She whispered. Why go digging? Louis nodded slowly. Because the man you're running from isn't just a name on a file. He's dangerous. If he finds you again, I need to be ready. Tracy's walls began to falter. I'm tired, Louis. I'm tired of flinching at every knock, of wondering if I'll ever sleep without locking chairs against doors. He reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. Then stop running. Stay. Let me stand beside you. Tracy didn't speak. But for the first time, she didn't pull away either. The wind rustled through the open windows of Louis's study as he sat at his desk, staring at a small silver key resting in his palm. It wasn't just any key. It was to the guest wing, the same wing Tracy and the twins had occupied for weeks, now under the illusion of being temporary. He closed the drawer slowly and made his way toward the hallway. Tracy was folding towels near the linen closet, humming to herself. She paused when she saw him approaching. You look like you've made up your mind about something, she said cautiously. Louis offered the key. You don't need to feel like you're tiptoeing through someone else's life anymore. This is yours if you want it. Stay for as long as you want. Tracy stared at the key, then at him. Her throat tightened. This isn't charity, she asked softly. Louis shook his head. It's home. If you'll accept it. She took the key slowly, her fingers trembling. No one's ever made space for us like this without wanting something in return. Louis's expression didn't waver. I just want to see you rest for once. Truly rest. That night, after tucking the twins into bed, Tracy sat on the edge of her new mattress, the key still clutched in her hand. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not out of fear, but relief. Across the hall, Louis stood by his window, watching the moonlight spill across the grass where Wendy had left her little shoes. And in that quiet, he realized that giving her that key wasn't just an invitation. It was a promise. The following week began like any other, with the scent of breakfast and the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. But Edna's expression darkened when she returned from the market. "There's a man asking questions at the gas station," she whispered to Louis. Tall, muscular, scar down his cheek. He asked about a woman with 2 kids. Louis stiffened. "Did he give a name?" "No," she replied, but his eyes, they were searching like a hunter. Without waiting, Louis called for Tracy, who had just come in from watering the garden. The color drained from her face when she heard the description. "That's him," she whispered. "It's Clint." Without hesitation, Louis locked the perimeter gates and notified security to heighten their presence discreetly. "You and the twins stay inside. No exceptions," he told Tracy, his voice low but firm. She nodded, visibly shaken. "He always said he'd find me." "But he won't take you from here," Louis assured. "Not while I'm breathing." Over the next few days, Tracy barely let the twins out of her sight. Even Wendy, usually bubbly, sensed something was wrong and clung to her mother's side. Louis slept little, staying up late reviewing footage from the cameras at the estate's borders. Every knock, every footstep outside made his chest tighten. But when he peeked in on Tracy one night, curled up beside the twins with the key still on her chain, he remembered why he had opened the door all those nights ago and why he would never close it on them again. It was a rainy afternoon when Eugene wandered into Louis's home office, looking for a pencil. Louis had left an old tablet charging on the desk, the screen flickering with icons from years ago. Curious, Eugene tapped around until a folder labeled Adoption Archive caught his eye. He opened it and stared at the scanned forms, legal documents, and a photograph of a much younger Louis standing beside a pregnant woman. When Louis entered moments later, he found Eugene staring at the screen with wide eyes. "Is that your baby?" the boy asked innocently. Louis's heart dropped. He gently closed the tablet and knelt beside him. It was going to be. Once, a long time ago. Eugene didn't ask further, sensing the heaviness in Louis's eyes. But that night, Louis sat alone, tablet open in front of him, rereading the old documents, the ones that had once carried his dreams of fatherhood. He hadn't looked at them in years, but seeing Eugene holding that device felt like more than coincidence. It felt like closure knocking on his door in the form of 2 small children who somehow belonged to his heart more than anyone ever had. When Tracy joined him later, curious about his silence, he showed her the files. "I tried to become a father once," he said quietly. "I thought the dream died with her, but maybe it just had to come back in a different form." Tracy placed her hand over his. "And maybe you were never waiting for a baby. Maybe you were waiting for us." Miriam arrived unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in designer black slacks and a silk blouse that gleamed under the sun. Louis was in the garden when Edna came to inform him. "She says it's urgent," he sighed, wiping his hands on a towel. When he entered the sitting room, Miriam was perched delicately on the edge of the leather couch, eyes wandering. "So this is the new world you've built," she said. "Children's shoes on the stairs, toys in the hallway. Charming." Louis sat across from her, silent. She cut to the point. "Victor's worried. He thinks you've lost your grip. And frankly, so do I. These people are using you. You don't know their history. You don't know their intentions." Louis's gaze didn't waver. "I know enough to know you're overstepping." But Miriam wasn't finished. She stood, walking toward the fireplace, voice calm and venom-laced. "You don't think the media would love to know that Louis Greenwood, billionaire tech mogul, is housing a fugitive and her illegitimate children? I wonder what that would do to your company's stock." Behind the door, Edna stiffened. She had heard enough. That night, she sat down with Louis, brows furrowed. "That girl came here with a plan," she said. "I heard her. She threatened to leak Tracy's past if you don't send them away." Louis nodded, then let her try. "I'll ruin her before she gets the chance." His voice was steel. Across the hall, Tracy tucked the twins into bed. She didn't know yet what Miriam had said, but she would. And Louis would make sure she heard the truth from him first. The night air was heavy, the scent of rain clinging to the windows. Tracy had just turned off the hall light when the sound of shattering glass jolted the house. Louis shot up from his armchair, heart thundering. "Stay with the kids," he ordered Edna, rushing toward the back entryway. There, under the pale moonlight, stood Clint, mud-smeared, eyes wild, a hunting knife glinting in his hand. "Where is she?" he bellowed. Louis stepped forward, fury rising. "You're trespassing," he said coldly. "Leave before this gets worse." Clint sneered. "She's mine. You think you can hide her in your palace?" And then he lunged. The struggle was violent, sharp, breathless. Louis fought back, untrained but fueled by raw protection. In the chaos, the blade grazed his side. Tracy appeared at the hallway entrance, frozen by the sight of the man she once feared more than death. But as Clint raised the knife again, she screamed, "Get away from them!" and hurled a flower vase with staggering force. It smashed against the wall beside him, momentarily distracting him long enough for Louis to knock him backward. Security burst in seconds later, pinning Clint to the ground as he screamed curses and threats. Blood pooled beneath Louis's shirt as he winced, gripping his side. Tracy rushed to him, tears blinding her vision. "You didn't have to fight him," she sobbed. Louis, breath ragged, managed a painful smile. "I wasn't going to let him take anything from you." As sirens echoed in the distance and Clint was dragged away, Louis collapsed into Tracy's arms, finally allowing the pain to take him under. The sterile white of the hospital room pulsed under fluorescent lights. Machines beeped steadily, and the slow drip of an IV matched the rhythm of Tracy's heartbeat as she sat at Louis's bedside. His face was pale but peaceful. She held his hand, fingers interlaced, her thumb running gently across his knuckles. The night had felt endless, the ambulance ride, the flashing lights, the quick decisions. She hadn't cried then, but now, in the stillness, the tears came quietly. "I thought I was done losing people," she whispered. "But you keep proving me wrong." Louis stirred, eyelids fluttering before he blinked slowly into focus. His voice was gravel. "Did we win?" She laughed softly through tears. "We're here, aren't we?" A knock came at the door. It was Edna, holding a bag with warm clothes and a flask of pepper soup. "The twins are fine," she said gently. Wendy asked if Daddy was okay. Tracy looked at her, eyes wide. "She called him that?" Edna smiled. I didn't correct her. Louis turned toward them, a faint smile lifting one corner of his lips. "Tell her Daddy's coming home soon." The room filled with an aching quiet. Tracy leaned in, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You bled for us," she said. "You fought like we were yours." Louis didn't look away. "You are mine, Tracy. You all are. I just didn't know how badly I needed you until I almost lost you." And in that hospital room, with the world briefly paused, love whispered its presence, not in grand declarations, but in wounded hands held tight and promises made without needing words. The next morning, the sun cast pale stripes across the tiled floors of the hospital room. Louis had been moved from intensive observation to a private suite, and Tracy was on the phone in the corridor, speaking with quiet urgency. When she returned, she sat beside his bed, her eyes focused and unwavering. "The authorities are handling it," she said. "But I don't want him near us again. I want to make it official." Louis nodded. "We'll file everything, restraining orders, witness statements. I have the lawyers ready." Just then, his longtime attorney, Mr. Kale, entered the room accompanied by a woman in an FBI windbreaker. "Mr. Greenwood," she greeted. "We're opening a federal investigation on Mr. Marshall. Turns out your intruder has a record beyond domestic abuse. He's wanted for trafficking and illegal custody arrangements in 3 states. Tracy's breath caught. "He tried to sell them," she whispered. The agent nodded grimly. "We believe he's been attempting to forge documents to traffic minors abroad. Your disappearance with the children disrupted that timeline." Louis looked at Tracy. "You didn't just save them, you exposed something much bigger." Later that day, under federal escort, Tracy gave a full statement. When she returned to the hospital, her hands were trembling. "It's all out now, everything." Louis reached for her fingers. "Then we're finally free to start over." Before she could answer, Wendy and Eugene burst into the room with Edna. Wendy clambered onto the bed, holding up a drawing of a superhero. "That's you," she said, pointing to the figure with a red scarf and shield. "You saved us." Louis smiled, pulling them both close. "And I always will." It was a quiet dinner at the estate that evening, a far cry from the chaos of recent days. The table was set simply, candles flickering between warm bowls of yam porridge and sweet plantain. Tracy moved carefully between the table and the kitchen, still adjusting to a world where they weren't hiding anymore. Eugene sat beside Louis, unusually quiet, while Wendy hummed under her breath. Midway through the meal, Eugene looked up and placed his spoon down gently. "Mr. Louis," he said hesitantly, can I ask you something?" Louis turned toward him with a nod. "Of course." Eugene's small fingers fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "Is it okay if I call you Daddy?" "Sometimes, only if you want." The room stilled, but even Wendy stopped chewing. Tracy looked at Louis, her breath catching. He set his fork down slowly, eyes locked on the boy's face. "You never have to ask permission to call me that," he said quietly. "You already feel like mine." Eugene's eyes shimmered, and Wendy reached over and held her brother's hand tightly. "Then we want to," she said firmly. Tracy lowered her gaze, emotions crashing into her like waves. Later, as the children played outside, Louis and Tracy stood at the back porch, watching them under the soft porch lights. "They chose you," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but it's more than that. I chose them too. And I chose you." Tracy rested her head against his shoulder, and they stood in silence, wrapped in something deeper than romance, something permanent. The following week began with paperwork, stacked and stamped, notarized and filled with legal phrases that barely contained the enormity of what they meant. Tracy sat in the study across from Louis as the family lawyer spread out the adoption forms. "It's all here," he explained. "All we need are your signatures." Wendy and Eugene were upstairs playing, unaware that their future was being rewritten below. Tracy stared at the documents. Her fingers hovered over the pen. "It feels so official," she murmured. "Like if I do this, there's no more undoing it. No more leaving if things go wrong." Louis leaned forward. "Tracy, you don't have to rush. But I need you to know this isn't just a gesture. I want to be their father, for real, forever." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You've already done more for them than anyone ever has. But signing these papers, it makes it real in ways that scare me." Louis placed a hand over hers. "You've been carrying their world on your back for 6 years. Let me share the weight." Slowly, she picked up the pen. With steady breath, she signed her name first, Tracy N. Marshall. Then Louis signed Louis K. Greenwood. The moment passed quietly, but something sacred lingered in the air. Upstairs, Wendy's voice echoed with laughter. Eugene's feet thudded softly against the floor. Tracy looked at Louis, heart trembling. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for signing. Thank you for choosing us when we had nothing to offer but chaos." Louis smiled gently. "That's when love matters most." A month had passed since the adoption papers were finalized. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly normal, lunchboxes packed in the morning, bedtime stories at night, and laughter echoing through rooms that once knew only silence. On a Sunday afternoon, Louis asked Tracy to join him on the back patio after dinner. The sky was painted in strokes of orange and lavender, and the children were asleep early after a long day of play. Tracy emerged wearing a soft lilac dress, her hair tied loosely in a scarf. Louis stood waiting beside the fountain, hands nervously tucked into his pockets. "Why do I feel like you're about to give me bad news?" she teased lightly. Louis chuckled. "Only if commitment scares you." He took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it slowly. The ring wasn't flashy, but it shimmered with elegance, a single diamond surrounded by 2 tiny emeralds, one for each child. Tracy's lips parted, stunned. Louis stepped closer. "You didn't just walk into my life, you restored it. And I want to spend every day returning that gift to you." "Tracy Marshall, will you marry me?" Her eyes filled, and for a moment she said nothing, just looked at the man who had fought for her without ever asking her to become someone else. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring on her finger and pulled her into an embrace that felt like a promise fulfilled. Above them, the wind stirred the trees as if nature itself was bearing witness to the beginning of something eternal. 1 year later, the Greenwood estate overflowed with music, laughter, and the soft coos of a newborn. Inside the sunlit nursery, Tracy rocked a tiny baby girl in her arms while Wendy and Eugene took turns decorating a paper banner that read, "Welcome home, baby joy." Louis peeked in, tie loosened and cheeks flushed with joy. "She looks just like you," he said, pressing a kiss to Tracy's temple. "She has your calm," Tracy replied, smiling. The house had transformed, no longer a museum of grief, but a sanctuary of second chances. Even the walls seemed warmer, the air more alive. In the hallway, framed pictures told the story. Court day, school recitals, bedtime cuddles, and now, a family portrait with 5 heartbeats. Later that afternoon, Louis stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The spring breeze kissed his face as he stood by the massive oak doors where it all began. He placed his palm against the smooth wood and whispered, "Thank God I opened it." A soft voice joined him, Tracy, holding baby Joy. "I still can't believe it all started with a knock," she said, leaning against his side. Louis turned, eyes glistening. "That knock saved me. Not just from loneliness, but from a life without meaning." Wendy and Eugene ran toward them, their laughter ringing through the courtyard. Louis scooped them both into a hug, one arm still wrapped around Tracy. For the first time in years, he felt complete. And as the front door gently creaked in the breeze, he knew he would never again close his heart to the unexpected. Because sometimes, the miracle you're waiting for doesn't come with trumpets or bright lights. Sometimes it comes in the rain, wearing tattered shoes, with a knock that changes everything. Here's the Bible verse, Hebrews 13, verse 2. "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." Explanation. This verse reflects the core of Louis's journey to what began as an act of reluctant compassion turned into the very miracle he didn't know his soul was longing for. Welcoming strangers into his home opened the door to healing, love, and family, proving that divine purpose often arrives in the most unexpected forms. Moral of the story: true family isn't always bound by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and the courage to open your heart when it's easier to close the door. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.